This video is brought to you by Squarespace. Okay, so this list is basically what the title says it is. The top 10 most iconic paint schemes from the 2010s. Now, I want to put some stuff out there first. Number one, throwbacks are not a paint scheme that will be considered, because throwbacks were not from the 2010s if they were throwing back in the 2010s. So those are off the board. Also, this isn't a complete popularity contest. This is going to take into account a few things. Popularity with fans is one, another is success on the racetrack, and I did add a little bit of points for longevity on it. So with that being said and that being laid out, we're going to get into the top 10 most iconic paint schemes of the 2010s right after this. Squarespace is a website building and hosting service that allows you to do and create plenty of different things on your own website or domain. Now, you can use it for any purpose really, with different templates as well as building domains, email campaigns, and members areas to chat with different people. One area that I really want to look towards to explore is email campaigns. That way, I'm able to keep every one of you in the loop and updated with different projects I'm doing, videos that might be coming out, as well as even the future races that I end up going to. That way, we all as a community can stay engaged with each other and really stay in the loop with each other. So, if you want to do the same or join me, head to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch your own website or domain, go to squarespace.com/theiceberg to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. That's squarespace.com/theiceberg. At number 10, we have Carl Edwards' Aflac scheme that he raced from 2010 till the end of his tenure at Roush. This scheme is one that I think a lot of fans really look back on with nostalgia. But if you look at it, it's a very unique scheme. Mostly black all around. The green wing on the side with the blue outline for Aflac just gives it a little bit of a unique quality that no other paint scheme really has. Then you also add in the duck on the side and on the hood, and you got a scheme that really can't be matched by too many others. Now, it's popular because it was driven by Carl Edwards, and Carl Edwards drove it very well. He was up front for a lot of the time in this scheme. I would say the most famous moment for this scheme, though, was finishing second to Tony Stewart in the 2011 championship race at Homestead in the finale. Now, Carl Edwards is the only driver to have driven this scheme, so that is a plus for it when it comes to being connected to a certain point in history. At number 9 is every variation really of Brad Keselowski's White Miller Lite scheme. Now, this is a scheme that is very, very clean no matter how you look at it. Whether you look at it when it was almost completely white, when it had more of a blue flare on the back, this scheme is one that you can point out anywhere on the racetrack. And Brad Keselowski really drove it well being up front. Just like with Carl Edwards' car, he was the only driver who ever drove this one. Now, I think it's really popular because, one, it's the Miller Lite car, and it's, quote-unquote, even though it's white, the Blue Deuce. But also, I think it's really popular just because of how many major moments that Brad Keselowski was up front and winning in this. He won a lot of races, and this car is one of the cars that you really think of when you think of the 2010s decade. But I'd say its most famous moment probably is when Brad Keselowski got into Jeff Gordon at Texas in 2014. But I think that this scheme is one that many fans associate with NASCAR and with the past 10 years or so. At number 8, we have the Furniture Row car. Now, this car is a very interesting and odd one. It doesn't matter what manufacturer they were in, what car generation they were in, what driver was in the car. The 78 Furniture Row car was another one, just like the white 2 car, that really popped out on the racetrack, that you could always see no matter where you were sitting at the track, no matter where they were in the field. When I say no matter where they were in the pack, it's because this scheme at the start of the decade was from a mid-20s pack team. And by the end of its tenure, it was a championship contender. I think that this car is so iconic for this decade because it represents just how far a team can come in NASCAR. It doesn't matter whether it was Regan Smith driving it for a win at Darlington, Kurt Busch driving it for his resurgence, or if it was Martin Truex Jr. winning a championship in dominating fashion with this scheme in part. This scheme probably is most popular for Martin Truex Jr. just absolutely dominating in it, or for Regan Smith's aforementioned Darlington win. Number 7 is Dale Earnhardt Jr.'s 2014 National Guard car. I think this one is one that's very iconic for a couple of reasons. One, of course, it's Dale Earnhardt Jr. Any paint scheme would really be memorable if it was driven by him, just because so many fans rooted for him. But it's not just because Jr. drove it. There's no other Dale Jr. schemes on this list except this one. I think it's because this scheme represents Dale Jr.'s return to form at the end of his career. Jr. had struggled at Hendrick Motorsports, so when he started winning again, of course, everyone was going to love everything about it. The almost completely primary white color on it was something that was different for Jr. as well, but the red and the blue streaking down the car as well really helped to pop out the side of it and scream National Guard. And the gold numbers are something that's very unique to add with it. I'd say this scheme's most famous moment probably would have to be Dale Jr. winning the 2014 Daytona 500. Number 6 is the Shell Pennzoil paint scheme. This scheme is another one that it doesn't matter the manufacturer or driver. This scheme has been the absolute same throughout its tenure. At first, it was driven in 2011 by Kurt Busch. Then it was driven by AJ Allmendinger and then Sam Horns Jr. in 2012, before Joey Logano took it over in 2013 at the start of the Gen 6 era. This scheme isn't very popular because a lot of people say it's boring just to have the same scheme, but for me, it's really a throwback to the way that things used to be. Now, not every scheme lasted over 10 years, but there were very few variations from year to year with a lot of the same sponsor, team, and scheme. And this scheme has went virtually unchanged since 2011. I'd say the most famous moment for this scheme, even though it was a different little variation of it, would probably be Joey Logano winning the championship in 2018. But there's been plenty of great moments with this scheme overall. Breaking into the top 5, we have Jimmie Johnson's 2016 Lowe's Chevrolet. Now, this car isn't the best looking Lowe's car ever. Personally, I don't think it's the best looking one even of this decade, but it does have one major thing, the most famous moment that I think makes it so iconic, and it's the fact Jimmie Johnson won his record-tying 7th championship in this 48 car. And I think that right there should show why this is such a major scheme. This is a scheme that now can be put next to Earnhardt's black Chevrolet and Petty's Petty Blue 43 car. It is one of the most historically relevant cars in NASCAR history, and because of that reason, because of the driver inside it, Jimmie Johnson, it is one of the most iconic cars of this decade. Number 4, the blue Miller Lite car. Now, this is one that I was trying not to allude too much to earlier. I had really made a point earlier to talk about the white Miller Lite car because later on I was going to talk about this one, the actual Blue Deuce. Now, this one was driven by Kurt Busch to start the decade, but Brad Keselowski is the one who really has had the most success this past decade in the Blue Deuce. What I really like about this car is the way that the blue shines, especially in night races, but also the fact they literally had a bottle of beer being poured into a glass on it. If that doesn't scream NASCAR to you, I don't know what was. In my opinion, this is probably one of the best looking schemes in my time of watching NASCAR. It's popular because of how good it looks, how historical it is, and as well as the name, but also just because of the driver too, Brad Keselowski. I'd say the most famous moment in this car was Brad Keselowski improbably taking the 2012 championship pretty handily, honestly, at the end of the year. This car definitely has to be high on everybody's list of best looking paint schemes, and for me, it definitely hits at number 4 for most iconic in this past decade. Taking the bronze on the podium is Jeff Gordon's AARP Drive to End Hunger Chevrolet. Now, there's been different variations of when this car was run, whether it was from 2011 to 2015, but overall, the scheme has stayed mostly the same. Now, I don't think that this scheme is on the level of the Rainbow Warrior scheme of the 90s or the Flame scheme of the 2000s, but I do think that this is a scheme that looks very sharp, looks very well done, and is one that immediately comes into the minds of fans of Jeff Gordon and fans of NASCAR overall. So it still is one of the best schemes of his in his career. And plus, the way that the colors are much darker, I think really helps make that 24, that neon 24 pop out more. And just like with Dale Earnhardt Jr. in 2014, this car I think represents a good final hurrah for Jeff Gordon, especially when you look at its most famous moment as a scheme, the 2015 race at Martinsville or Jeff Gordon's final win. So this one definitely has to be in my top 3 of the last decade. Taking the silver on this list is Tony Stewart's Office Depot Chevrolet that he drove at the end of the COT era. Now, why do I have this one right here, this high up on the list? Well, I think it's because, for one, this scheme is one that, of course, many people can think back to. But number 2 is it holds a ton of historical precedence and a ton of historical relevance as well. This scheme was the one that Tony Stewart made that incredible run at the end of the 2011 season with, winning 5 times out of the last 10 races. But also, this scheme, in its most famous moment, represented a turning point for NASCAR. See, back when this scheme was being run, it was a final 10-race chase where whoever got the most points at the end of the 10 races in the chase won the championship. Well, coming down to the wire, another scheme on this list, Carl Edwards, was battling with Tony Stewart, and they ended up tying, racing for the championship and the win. And a lot of people credit this moment as being the moment that NASCAR realized they needed to have a winner-take-all championship every year, like what we have now. So this scheme, in its most famous moment, probably changed the sport more than any other car probably has in the last 25 years. Now, with that being said, the gold still has to go, in my opinion, to Kyle Busch's M&M's car from basically the entire decade. Yeah, this one did have a lot of changes that were kind of big, but overall, the same thing stayed the same. A mostly yellow or in some aspects green background with M&M's all over it. Now, why do I put this one over such a relevant scheme like Tony Stewart's 2011 championship? Well, it's because this scheme is probably the only one that really has went almost completely unchanged throughout the entire decade, through even up into the 2020s. And also the fact that this scheme probably won almost as much, if not more, than any other scheme in the decade. When you look at it too, you have the most dominant driver of this past 10-year span in this car as well. The man won 2 championships driving this scheme. So I don't see how anyone can't see this scheme as being the most defining and the most relevant scheme of the 2010s decade. And that's it. Those were the most iconic schemes, in my opinion, of the 2010s decade. Now, I understand that most people probably will not agree with every aspect of my list, so I really encourage you in the comments below to leave your own. And while you're at it, like the video and share it to other people so they can see and also share their own. And if you really like it, you can also subscribe to the channel as well. And if you really like it while being subscribed to the channel, you can join the channel memberships option. It would really help the channel out as well. So, until next time, have a good one.